Welcome to the Holistic Growth Podcast, navigating business and natural health and functional medicine, where we bring you insights and strategies to help grow your practice and amplify your impact. Welcome, everybody, to the Holistic Growth Podcast. I'm Tracey Stroup. I am the Chief Health and Growth Officer right here at Get Healthy Store, who hosts and promotes this podcast. Today, we're diving into something that I think is massively misunderstood, mental health. It's not just in your head, it's deeply connected to what's happening in your body. I'm joined by Dr. Avery Jackson, neurosurgeon and Chief Medical Advisor for Cardio Miracle. And we're going to unpack the connection between brain health, circulation, nitric oxide, and what it actually takes to create more good days. This is actually a conversation about science, physiology, and overall hope, because people don't just need awareness, they need solutions. So, Dr. Avery Jackson, I'm so glad that you're here. I haven't talked to you in forever. Thanks for being on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Dr. Tracey. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you give us a little background on yourself, but also how did you get involved with Cardio Miracle?
For sure. So I'm a board certified neurosurgeon and practiced in Michigan, both in complex spine as well as brain cases. And I got involved in Cardio Miracle because now, after 20 years of practice and about 10,000 surgeries, I noticed that while we were doing a pretty good job at helping people in certain areas, we were really lacking in other areas, and especially in nutritional health and wellness. You know, the average allopathic doc at least for me, had 1 hour of nutrition in medical school. So we knew nothing about that world, which is super important, and that would mitigate, chronic diseases and so forth. So I was operating, had long case, was having some leg cramps. I asked a colleague about, we're talking about it, and they recommended to try Cardio Miracle. I did. My cramps went away. I thought, okay, this is interesting. Caught my attention. Then I provided the Cardio Miracle to some of my patients, one of which is a person who had a non-healing ulcer that on her leg, and was getting worse after 2 years of conservative therapy, standard of care, not getting any better. Tried the Cardio Miracle, and within 3 months, it shrunk down to the size of a pinhole. So that caught my attention. And so from there, I've been a huge advocate of the science behind Cardio Miracle and nitric oxide, and just seeing how it's really helpful to people in general.
Yeah. Well, awesome testimonies. And, I know allopathic model type of medicine doesn't teach, the nutrition. Hopefully we're going to see that change in the future, but it really does take education beyond graduation. That's what I tell, even in natural health, you have to continue your education because it's ever evolving. The science is always changing. We learn new things every day. So just being that forever student, I'm super happy that you're on our side now, and representing this great product that, John and the team has put together. It's brilliant. So today, our focus obviously is on mental health as a neurosurgeon and what you have seen in practice. So from your perspective as a neurosurgeon, is mental health really separate from physical health?
Right. And I guess yes and no. You've got the mental side of things, and you have the physical substrate, the brain, and those impact each other for sure. And so if the plumbing of the brain is affected, if you're not getting enough nutrition, then obviously that's going to affect your mental health in that sense, if you will. And I'll tell you, it's fascinating as a neurosurgeon realizing that when people are missing out on good blood flow, then that does affect their physical health, their mental health, their memory. Cognitive disease becomes more common, more inflammation in the brain. And so all of those kind of, physical plumbing, brain substrate issues are there. And then that has an impact also on their mental health, how they feel, their motivation, their serotonin and other neurotransmitters aren't doing what they need to do. And so then that affects, their outlook on life. That affects anxiety. That affects their so many different systems. So huge impact.
Yeah. I think we try to, I always tell people like from the neck up, they give you a pill, from the neck down. We talk to our clients about lifestyle change and lowering stress and all the things. But when it comes to mental health, it's not how it is. And I had actually read an article in the Journal of American Medical Association. It was a long time ago, like 2013, but it was written by a group of psychiatrists that actually found almost 90% of the mental health issues that they were treating at the time were based in viral or bacterial infections, so that they literally had an infection component that created, an epitope pattern that the body was immunologically attacking, not only the bacteria or virus, but also similar epitope patterns in brain tissue. So I thought that was fascinating. And it was like the first time I ever saw it connected in science. So I definitely think you're onto something. So when you are actually looking at the brain, when someone says, I feel off, what kind of deficiencies are you seeing physically that is creating maybe that, I don't know, depletion in brain communication?
Right. And so, Dr. Tracy, really, really great point. And I'll tell you that one of our clients is someone who has Rasmussen syndrome, and that is when there's inflammation that creates chronic seizures, and especially in the pediatric population. And the answer, for the general answer from a neurosurgical neurologic standpoint, is you remove that focus of seizure, that epileptiform focus, which can be up to half of their brain. And yet, when you look at the biopsies that have been taken on these young folks, you find that there's inflammation, and the thought is the etiology is due to infection, an infection, agent. However, the infectious agent was never isolated in any of these brain biopsies. And so then that gets really interesting when you talk about epitopes, because we had someone, in fact, that was suggested to have a large craniotomy to remove half of this person's brain, literally, and then steroids, and then anti-epileptics for the seizure medication. Family decided on a more natural approach, and they were able to deal with the infectious agents, the detoxing, holistic approach. And now this person went from 16 seizures a day, and with looking at a potential brain surgery, to less than one seizure a week, no steroids, and no anti-seizure medications over the course of a 2-year journey. So very significant. And I would agree that the epitopes that the antibodies see in that person's GI system, and that they're exposed to, were similar epitopes to what is seen in the brain. And that's why we think that's the origin of the inflammatory kind of reactions that occur in the brain on the imaging studies, leading to the seizure activity.
Wow. I mean, for people, that's probably a lot of information. I mean, I understand what you're saying, and not probably as much as you understand what you're saying, but basically, given the right amount of nutrients and time, this person's body was able to mitigate the infection, which was creating the inflammation through immunological response. And then those same antibodies were attacking certain points of the brain because it couldn't differentiate. And I think, we have a very much a kill mentality in our society as a whole. Like, if you get a bacterial infection, like, we got to kill. You get a viral, we got to kill. Cancer, we got to kill. We want to kill everything. And sometimes we need to fill. We need a fill mentality where we have to get the body enough so it's able to overcome the T lymphocytes and NK killer cells and all the things that the body needs are able to go target and identify. So I love that approach. You gave the body nutrients and time, and that was the remedy rather than taking out half a brain.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
That's
And it's interesting what I'm learning again, unlike my naturopathic colleagues who are way ahead of us in understanding what happens when you fill, right,
mm,
as opposed to kill, that your body is made in such an amazing way that it will do what it needs to do when it has the right fuel. And that's what I've been learning over this 5-year journey, that fill it up, and go from there. And so with the Cardio Miracle, I've noticed that with the nitric oxide and the other ingredients that are organic fruits and vegetables, what a difference it's made in not only the inflammatory side of the house, but also the infectious side of the house. So being able to deal with certain infectious etiologies better, eliminating those, and at the same time mitigating the inflammatory reactions, the IL-6 and tumor necrosis factors and others, has
Mhm.
been absolutely amazing. And so I'm excited as I'm learning more about, kind of the nutritional natural world and how this really makes sense. And for me, this journey began with Cardio Miracle in particular. And so, and learning about nitric oxide. I mean, what's interesting, Dr. Tracey, one of the factoids I learned that I was really excited about was that when we laugh, we actually secrete nitric oxide from our endothelial lining of our blood vessels. So our blood vessel walls will secrete nitric oxide, and nitric oxide is a potent anti-inflammatory, as well as helping with blood flow and all the blood dynamics. So that was kind of a neat thing that I learned about. And then from there, kind of getting deeper into why the nitric oxide, when supported in the way that it is actually kind of symbiotic when there's a whole host of other ingredients, then it will last in the body for longer, and it'll actually stimulate the production of nitric oxide as well as maintain nitric oxide, the good nitric oxide in the system.
Amazing. Yeah, it's God's design is pretty cool of our bodies, that's what I always say. So while we're on the topic of nitric oxide, I want to pause just for a second, just for the listeners. I don't know how they could not have heard of nitric oxide, but it's possible. What is it? Why is it beneficial? And when we talk about the brain, what does subtle
Yeah.
oxygen depletion do? What if we're low in nitric oxide? So can you just kind of give us a high level look there?
Great. And so, Dr. Tracey, high level look, nitric oxide is a very potent signaling molecule. There are three different isoforms of it. There's nitric oxide, enos, which is the good guy that we just talked about. There's inos and nnos. And so those two, the inos is more inflammatory and is kind of a residual that can cause inflammation, and then the nnos is more related at a neural level. And so when we have inflammatory states, when there's infection, when there's lots of stress, emotional stress, when there's physical trauma, then what happens is you secrete more of the enos, and that takes care of the inflammation. However, you can run out. And when you run out of the enos, your stores are depleted, and then that's when the inflammation will increase and cause major problems. And so that's the reason why the nitric oxide needs to be bioavailable. It needs to be sustained in the system, and encouraged. Your body needs to be encouraged to produce more, and that's why it has in the Cardio Miracle, it has all those other components that will the citrulline and L-arginine, which will activate one of the enzymes at the vessel wall level to create more of the nitric oxide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you just mentioned stress, right? So we might as well go down that path. So now we
Yep.
understand nitric oxide. We understand that when we don't have this signaling molecule, that our body can't control inflammation, our body can't control repair, can't signal other things. It's pretty amazing, that one little tiny molecule. But it does take other things in conjunction. We're going to talk about the whole panel of Cardio Miracle, which is amazing. But talk to me a little bit about stress. I mean, you've held brains in your hands. I can't imagine what each individual person's brain looked like pertaining to if they had a sickness or a trauma or a stressful event. How does stress really impact the brain, and what is it doing? What have you seen?
So, well, Dr. Tracy, so stress, it's interesting. There are some studies out there, depending upon who you read, that 75 to 90% of stress, anxiety, depression will actually either cause or significantly contribute to the course of physical disease and illness.
I
just a
believe
direct
that.
correlation.
I
And one
believe
of the
that.
many reasons is because your serotonin levels, your feel good neurochemical in your brain will decrease. Number one, and the serotonin is actually housed and carried on your platelets. So there's a direct connection between your GI system, your gut biome, and the neurochemicals and inflammation and stress. So they're all completely connected. The other piece is interesting is we notice that the blood flow in the brain will decrease and the oxygen levels will decrease with stress, and especially around the area which would be called the hippocampus. And the hippocampus has five sections that are very sensitive to oxygen level. And so when the blood flow decreases, oxygen carrying capacity decreases to that area, and now memory will decrease, and that leads to actually changes even in mood. And so there's all these major changes that we see both at a macro level and then at a cellular level, which will then we'll see the residual results, which is going to usually be in how that person functions in their day-to-day interaction with other people, in their level of forgetfulness, in the mood swings. And it's very much it's a very much also a spiritual
Yeah.
a phenomenon, right? And so and so that is near and dear to my heart as a Christian. First Thessalonians 5:23 says that we are spirit, soul, and body. There's three parts of us, and I think that's why having this discussion is so germane. What happened to all of us as a global population over the last 5 years or so has increased in one way or another significant stressors. And one of the things I'll mention is there's a study looking at people who take care of Alzheimer's family members, and they compared the age-matched, sex-matched group in those who took care of Alzheimer's family members and those who didn't, and found that their inflammatory markers in their blood, the IL-6, tumor necrosis factor, and others, were actually higher, significantly higher by 6 months compared to those who did not. And so that was a very powerful study confirming that your emotional stressors really do impact your physiology and your brain and your blood and the inflammation that we tend to house.
Yeah, I mean, you can tangibly touch a brain, but you can't tangibly touch mental health or a thought, right? And
Yeah.
I always tell my clients, like, your body is always responding to the environment you put it in. And part of that environment is what you think. And if you're constantly negative, fear-based, stressed out, angry, there is a physiological response to that. Parasympathetic nervous system, our rest and digest, goes down. Sympathetic nervous system, which is fight or flight, goes up. And so we start decreasing the production of our gastric juices. We're not assimilating nutrients anymore. Our body goes into this, I got to take all my energy because Tracey needs to run, except I'm not running anywhere. I'm thinking in my head, but my body doesn't know the difference between thoughts that I'm thinking or if I'm actually being chased down the road by a cheetah.
Yeah.
And the problem is, we sit in these little boxes all day and stress out, and we have no place to get rid of that increased cortisol, the increased glucose that gets dumped into our blood. We go down a path of cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease, all of the things. And so we need to really look at our mental health, not only because of the thoughts, the serotonin, and the dopamine, but the actual impact physiologically on our entire body, which is amazing because Cardio Miracle covers the entire metabolic spectrum. So it's not.
I'd say it's so much more. And one of the things that's really interesting that I noticed is that in Cardio Miracle, we look at like the glutathione and then the N-acetyl cysteine and the lion's mane and some other ingredients, which is really amazing. The grapeseed extract, the L-arginine. So it's a lot of good stuff, which again, for me, 5 years ago, I really didn't have like an understanding of, whereas you
Why are
guys
you
always
people
did.
taking lion's mane?
Right, right, right. And yet
Oh, real long?
I know, right? And so one of the things that so my naturopathic colleagues, the allopathic docs need to pull up a chair, and sit with you guys so that we can understand what you guys have been preaching and taking care of, for your entire careers. And so to me, it's interesting because Cardio Miracle is kind of like an interface of that, right? There's this science that the allopathic mind kind of gets, and then the nutritional side and the nutritional science and wholeness that is definitely more naturopathic, that in Cardio Miracles. So it's an interesting discussion point when you talk about the ingredients and how those ingredients work together in the systems. And one of the points you mentioned, even though Cardio Miracle, it's helped heart health in general and brain health, blood flow, but every organ needs the oxygen and needs the blood supply to work and be nourished. And so this is one of the major advantages to the Cardio Miracle. So
Yeah, they need to rename it Metabolic Miracle. There you go, John. I gave you a new a new name.
you know what, Dr. Tracey, you're spot on, because what we're seeing is that the Cardio Miracle, it helps in totally other ways, like when we have like autophagy. So Cardio Miracle encourages autophagy, right? Which is when your white blood cells and the garbage men clean up all the bad proteins and toxins. So it actually enhances that process. And so some of us will have a 10-day, instead of a water fast, we'll do a Cardio Miracle fast and only have Cardio Miracle. And it doesn't bump your blood sugars at all. So it's great for, you talked about the metabolic syndrome. So it's great for those who have diabetes, but if you're fasting, it doesn't bump your sugars. So you can still take advantage of the great taste and the fasting side of things. So
Right. Yeah, and it's great. And the panel, I mean, you have a full vitamin panel, A, C, D, E, K, all of the B vitamins in the right forms, which is really important. And then we have what I would call the detox panel, right? You have your glutathione, you have your N-acetylcysteine, then you
yep.
have your antioxidant panel, and then you have your nitric oxide panel in there. So it's like this full synergistic blend. But I don't think people realize the power of it. And I think, during COVID and whatnot, it came to the forefront because it was supporting so many systems that were being impacted. I mean, we talked about mental health, it helps that. We talked about stress, it helps that. We talked about people sitting around on their duff, right? Gaining weight, getting cardiovascular disease, it helps that. People eating too much, staying at home, it helps that. So it is really the metabolic pathway, what I would say supplement,
Yep.
because if you are suffering from any type of metabolic syndrome, it really does. So pulling it back to mental health, we talked about stress. We didn't really talk about depression, anxiety, things of that nature. And I would like us to get into that because I think long-term stress is going to lead to one or the other, right? They say anxiety is worrying about the future and depression is regret about the past. But now that we have a better physiological understanding, what would you say the psychological mental health world is getting wrong?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Well, a couple of things are getting wrong. Is I think the basic mechanisms
Dr.
of
Avery, you're
cardio.
like, hold on, let me get my list. Hold on
I
a
know
minute.
it's so long, Dr. Tracey. So if you go to the website, we have an article in Stress magazine, a PTSD article, looking at the impact of all of these factors on those who've had PTSD and have experienced some form of emotional, mental, or physical trauma, leading to the stress and the anxiety and the depression.
Is that the
And
article by Stan?
yeah, yes, right. Yep. By Stan on the website, the Cardio Miracle
Yes.
website, we have 4 articles that are there. And that PTSD article is important because some of these ingredients have really made a difference in sleep. And oftentimes when these individuals, they have a hard time getting to sleep. And when they do sleep, it's not good quality sleep. And so that affects all of their other systems. And so the Cardio Miracles really kind of helped with that, in terms of blood flow and some of the things that we've just talked about. And I would say that where we get it wrong is, in the allopathic world, we say it is the physical substrate. And when your dopamine level is lower, your serotonin level is lower, we're just going to give you more of it. Like there's no like discussion about, well, what are root causes? And can those root causes be toxins, environmental, or can they be because of exposure to some form of a traumatic experience as a child or as an adult? And what role does that play in affecting the physical substrate? And so there's a direct correlation, and that is that your fight or flight, as you mentioned, your sympathetic system is going to be fired up, and now you've got these fires everywhere in your brain, and now your body's going to feel the fire and the effects, and so we need to put out those fires. And the first way to do that, as you mentioned earlier, is to fill up as a
Mhm.
baseline. And I've in my algorithm now, my recommendation is fill up to make sure that your systems have the fuel that they need to then take care of a lot of the basic issues. And then from there, we can make recommendations of more sophisticated ways to provide more focused therapies and interventions that are going to be helping people holistically in all of their systems. But that's the baseline: is fill up first.
Yeah. And so, responsibly, because there are mental health issues that people do require some medications for. There have been head injuries where the structure of the neurology has changed, but still, people could still benefit from
Yeah.
cardiac taking it in conjunction with medications, correct?
Totally. And that's the nice thing is that because these are natural fruits and vegetables in a powder, I'm not as concerned about kind of the major issues that I would be with a synthetic, option, if you will. I'm one of the things that I learned again from my naturopathic colleagues. I have some dear friends. Janice Schmidt's one of them, but there are many who basically kind of understand that it's a symphony. And unfortunately, we can be so micro focused on one system that we say, we're going to throw everything at that system and artificially turn this protein on or turn that off. And we're not thinking about, well, what's the impact on all these other systems, right? And so I think that's an important piece, and that's what we're finding. So that yes, some people need more intervention, and that may require a medication, and we get that. But at least having something as natural as Cardio Miracle works really well, even in that scenario.
Yeah. Well, I want to get into, you know, obviously Cardio Miracle is an incredible add-in from what I understand now to anybody's daily regimen. It can be used as an overall multivitamin, metabolic enhancer, and now we know even mental health support,
Yeah.
which is huge because I really think in general in our society, Dr. Avery, mental health is declining. And one of the big reasons is because of these little square idiot boxes that we all have that we think we're connected, but we're not connected, right? We have this false dopamine hit watching other people's lives on social media, but we're not really out there connecting and being social ourselves. And I believe the true way that God intended us to be. So, what would you say? What is the impact of community on somebody's mental health overall?
Yeah. Well, so Dr. Tracey, the impact of community on mental health is huge. For instance, there's a study that shows that when you are in proximity with people that you have a relationship that you love, that your heartbeat will sync up. There's another study that shows that also breathing will. And so there is a direct connection between your physiology and the health of your physiology when you're around people who are healthy, a healthy environment, and that you can encourage each other and you can communicate with each other. We know that Pitocin and other neurochemicals in our brains, neurotransmitters, will increase when you're in community, when there's a hug or a touch. It makes a difference. And what I refer back to something that people may remember, and I'm going to age myself a little, but back in time, the hug that changed medicine. It's on the cover of Time. And so if you go there, you'll see it was about these two twins that were preemies. And one of the twin girls was doing well and thriving in the bassinet in the ICU. They were preemies. The other one was really having a hard time. Her systems were beginning to shut down. And over about a couple of weeks, they said, we've got to do something about this. So they put the other preemie in the bed, in the bassinet, with the one that wasn't doing well. And within hours, changing nothing else, that her organs went back online, her vitals were stabilized, and she went on to do very, very well. So there's a huge connection between community and our mental health and also our physiology, our physical health.
Yeah, and they say what a hug for 20 seconds actually has physiological changes in the body. Now we know if it's someone you don't like, you probably should not embrace them.
Right. I know one of the things, Dr. Tracy, is so coming up on May 7th at 7 p.m. Eastern time. There's from the Maha movement. John Hewlett and I are going to be having a great discussion about some of these things and getting into some more of
Yeah.
the neurophysiology that's upcoming. So it just reminded me in terms of community and the way that we can support each other in different ways. So
This is an online discussion that our listeners can tune into. Where would they find the information if they want to join?
so they can find it. It's going to be on the website, and which is the cardiomiracle.com. And let me
We'll
see
post it in
here.
the show notes as well for everyone listening, a
Yes,
link
please.
to
Great.
join. But that's next Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern. So that would be May 7th at 7. Is that correct? I have the date right? Okay, good.
Yeah.
I'd had to do quick math there, and sometimes that is not my gift. Neither is spelling, but it can't be perfect, you know. So if someone's listening right now to this and struggling, what would you want them to hear today?
Well, the first is the reason that we do all this is because you're loved.
Mm.
That the number one, there was a study looking at what is the most addictive substance. And it turns out that love is more addictive than cocaine. It's more addictive than, pretty much everything. And there's a reason, because we were meant to love. And when you are in a love state, you're more receptive. Your neurochemicals are balanced. Your body is balanced. Like everything changes. And I think today's society and all the forces that we are dealing with tries to neutralize or mitigate that love response and that love environment. And so I would say that, and I think Cardio Miracle was born out of a heart of love, that John Hewlett, the founder, said, look, this is hope in a glass. This is going to change the health, the mental and physical health of mankind. So, and he's masterful at what he's done in providing an excellent nutraceutical to make this happen for both kids and adults. And so I would say that's it. It's all about love.
Yeah. Well, I love that. So, and I really like the story about the baby and hugs. And again, that is what they tried to take away from us during the pandemic. Keep us apart, separate, don't touch. Those people will make you sick. It was terrible. It was no different from any other time in history when it was blatant, awful hatred that was coming between society. And the only thing that will save us in the end is love. So, Dr. Avery, I really appreciate your time and you spending it with me and coming in and educating our practitioners on Cardio Miracle. I want to remind everybody that this is in the Get Healthy catalog, and you can also connect with Cardio Miracle at cardiomiracle.com, get a wholesale account, get enrolled in their education, listen to their podcast, and definitely tune in on the 7th at 7 p.m. Eastern to find out about this great event and it's online, right? You and John Hewlett, the founder. So going to be beautiful. Do you want to leave our listeners with any last thoughts?
Yeah, well, Dr. Tracy, thanks for having me and Cardio Miracle. And I just again make sure that you take time to love yourself and love others, and receive love. And I think this is one of the ways that Dr. Tracy is educating you so that you can be a better lover and a receiver of love. So
Boy, that puts a lot of pressure on me, Dr. Avery.
yeah, that's right.
Every woman in America is going to be like, now you promised, Tracy, if I gave my husband this Cardio Miracle, I'm going to get in trouble. Let's recant that statement. Love is the way.
That's right. Although it does help ED,
It
just so
does.
you
I
know,
know it
blood flow.
does. Absolutely. Yes, that is. Well, we can come back and talk about that, but totally, erectile dysfunction is a metabolic issue, and people don't realize it's based in insulin resistance, high glucose, and it's one of your first signs of cardiovascular disease, and men need to pay attention to it. And if you're listening to this, or you're a woman listening to this, and it's your husband or whoever, get them on Cardio Miracle. It might save their life. So here's the truth on the whole mental health thing. It's not separate from physical health. We now know that when we support our body, we support our brain. When we improve circulation, energy, recovery, we create conditions for more clarity, more resilience, and more days. So, and ultimately, at the end, it's all based in love and hope, and that's really what matters. So, Dr. Avery, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your passion, and also your love with our audience. We were so blessed to have you today.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Tracey.
Absolutely. All right, guys, make sure you share this with someone that it can help. Also, don't forget to connect with Cardio Miracle and add it to your Get Healthy store. We're so glad that you've tuned in today. Like and subscribe. Thanks for being here.